welcome. My name is Riley Sunday, and I'm an agriculture conservationist and the nutrient management specialist at the Allegheny County Conservation District. Today, we're going to be talking about manure management regulations, specifically Chapter 91. I'll be providing an introduction to the regulation, talk about some of the benefits this regulation provides for our municipalities in Allegheny County, and finally, how we at ACCD can further assist you with manure management in your municipality. I also have John Burgess online with me today. We work together at the district, and he'll be keeping track of questions during the presentation. Please enter your questions in the chat box below, and I'll respond to those at 2 points in the presentation. Later, I will also be sending out some additional resources and a link to our awesome survey that I hope you'll all take. So let's get started. So there are two goals that we're going to try and meet through this presentation. The first is an overarching goal that we talk about a lot with manure and nutrient management regulations, and it's that of voluntary compliance. This is a regulation, and if it's not followed, there can be serious consequences for farms. But our job is to help folks to the best of our ability know what they need to do in order to comply. The second goal is to give you all an introduction to Chapter 91 manure management. So when you're getting questions about manure or complaints about manure, or even if you want to incorporate livestock guidelines into your ordinances, you know some of the basics and where you can find more information. So let's dive in. There are 3 sections in this presentation. The first is an overview of Chapter 91. What is it? Who needs to comply? What are the components? After this section, I will be taking some questions. Sometimes the regulation can get a little in the weeds, and I want to make sure people are as clear as they can be about what's going on with Chapter 91. Then I will talk about some benefits for municipalities, and I'll wrap up by talking about our role at ACCD and how we can support municipalities and farmers with Chapter 91. So manure management is regulated by the Department of Environmental Protection under the Clean Streams Law. At its core, it is a water quality program that strives to prevent nutrient and manure contamination of the waters of the Commonwealth. The county conservation districts are the boots on the ground enforcement of this regulation, but ultimately the desire for this program is to encourage voluntary compliance. This means that we work with folks to give them every opportunity to elect practices that bring them into compliance. Here you can see the specific policy for Chapter 91 manure management, and that policy is every farm in Pennsylvania that land applies manure or agricultural processed wastewater generated on-site or received from an importer, regardless of size, is required to have and implement a written manure management plan. This includes manure and wastewater applied via equipment or deposited directly on pastures or in ACAs, animal concentration areas, by the animals themselves. So who exactly needs to comply with Chapter 91? The answer is simple. It is all livestock owners. Even if you only own 1 chicken, you are included in Chapter 91. The way the law is sometimes explained can be misleading to some animal owners because for some, they think of this as a farm regulation. While it's true that this applies to farms, it also applies to folks with farm animals as pets. Also, not only are operations that produce manure included in this regulation, but also operations that use manure, including landscapers. So we have operations that produce or use manure, including ones that use manure for non-agricultural uses like landscapers. We have operations applying manure and agricultural process wastewaters. Also, farms that pasture animals and farms with animal concentration areas, or ACAs. Pastures and ACAs can be complicated, and I'm going to explain them more in depth in a moment. But for the time being, remember, manure management is just as important for folks who are leaving their animals out in an enclosed outdoor area and not actively collecting their manure. The main activity that brings a livestock owner into compliance with Chapter 91 is the development and use of a manure management plan. One important thing to note about manure management plans is that they are for low-density animal operations and are very flexible. Manure is also regulated by Act 38, where high-density animal operations are required to have and implement a more complicated nutrient management plan. But for now, I want to stay focused on these manure management plans. Like I said, these plans are pretty flexible, and since we're not performing routine inspections on these operations, it's important that folks update their plan when they add or subtract animals, add or subtract land, or other key features that would change any of the pages in this plan. I'm going to go through now and talk about each of these sections that are required in the plan and what their components are. Please note that I'm not going super in depth with each section, but if you have questions, again, feel free to pop them in the Q&A and I'll take a look before we move on. The first section of a manure management plan includes general information. It's here that livestock owners will identify their animal numbers and key water features on their farms like streams, wells, sinkholes that could potentially be points of connection between manure runoff and surface or groundwater. Remember, this is a water quality program. This section will also indicate which additional sections of the overall plan need to be completed. Not every plan needs to include all of the pages, which is why it's important to start with the general information. And a lot of operations that I visit are small and don't necessarily require this mechanical manure application section, but it's still an important component. So if you have someone that's spreading manure or wants to be spreading manure using equipment, there are additional requirements that need to be taken into consideration. Most importantly, there are setbacks, so you're not allowed to mechanically apply manure within 100 feet of public or private wells, within 100 feet of a pond, within 100 feet of the top of a stream bank, and within 100 feet from an open sinkhole or areas where the bedrock is up at the surface. Sometimes we call these rocky outcroppings, and those are important areas to have setbacks because sinkholes, karst features, rocky outcroppings, those are areas where there could be a direct connection with groundwater. I couldn't find a good picture of this other setback that's required, but you need to have a setback from a non-vegetated channel like a rockline swale or gully or ditch. A lot of times these are along roads and can lead directly into stormwater systems. You don't want manure in your stormwater system. There is also a piece of the manure management planning where you do not necessarily want to be applying manure in the winter. In general, we do not recommend spreading manure in the winter because the goal of spreading manure is to ensure plants are able to utilize manure nutrients, which they do not do in the winter because they're not growing, and this could lead to greater runoff problems. If spreading manure is absolutely necessary in the winter, plan writers need to heed additional guidelines that can be found in the Manure Management Plan workbook. The program has 3 definitions of winter. The first would be winter occurs between December 15th and February 28th. Winter also is if the ground is frozen to a depth of 4 inches. And it is also winter if the ground is snow covered. I'm sure some folks on here can think of a time when they saw snow in October, and that would mean that it is winter, according to manure management guidelines. The third section is a farm map. This is a really important piece to the plan, and it is where operators can identify different features on their farm. You can make simple maps just by drawing them inside the plan, or this map I made using PA One Stop. It's a very simple online platform that you can outline different features. And one thing I like about making the maps on PA One Stop is you can see here this yellow circle surrounding kind of the house area. That is where I put a well on this particular property. And this yellow circle is a 100-foot manure application setback. So if I'm just looking at this map, I know that I cannot be mechanically spreading manure anywhere within that yellow circle. But it also lets you identify other features like a pasture or a coop or a compost pile, whatever you might need to include on your map. The fourth section is probably one of the most important sections of the manure management plan and the piece that is most often neglected. Proper record keeping benefits everyone. Some examples of records that can be kept with a manure management plan include crop rotations and yields, manure application, and if manure is ever leaving the site. If I'm responding to a formally submitted complaint about someone who has livestock, the first thing I'm going to ask for is to see a copy of the manure management plan and take a look at the records, because I'm not at the site every day and we are not required to perform routine inspections of these sites. So I rely pretty heavily on the operator's ability to keep records and let me know what's going on their site so I can decide if there's a problem. The manure storage and stacking is another section of the plan that is important to fill out, especially when it comes to handling complaints. The manure storage and stacking determines how the pile is being managed. So is this pile being turned into compost? If so, are the records of the temperature and additions to the pile being maintained? Is the manure pile being applied to a vegetable garden? If so, how much manure and how often? Are folks picking up the manure to use in their home gardens? If so, how much, how often? Is the manure leaving the site all at once? If so, who's taking it, how much, how often? Stacking manure is allowed in this program, and there are often a lot of complaints about manure stacks, but the one thing that's really important to note is that manure, if it's stacked on a site for more than 120 days, it must be covered with a watertight cover. A common example that I see is livestock owners will use a tarp and then they'll weigh the tarp down with cinder blocks or bricks or spare lumber. This is really important because it keeps rainwater and excess moisture from entering the pile and leaching manure nutrients into the groundwater or having nutrients run off the pile down the road into the storm sewer, things that we're just really not interested. So we're now going to talk about pasture management. And I want to start by defining pasture. A pasture is a fenced-in area on an operation that livestock utilize and is able to maintain at least 3 inches of dense vegetative cover. Pastures can be tricky. Often when people picture pastures, they're picturing animals or areas where their animals are able to be outside, access a little green space, get their exercise. But a pasture is a conscious management decision. Without the 3 inches of vegetative cover, we do not have a pasture. Take a look at this picture. We have a happy goat mama and her 2 kids. I've been to a couple of sites that look like this, and the operator will tell me that they have a pasture here. Unfortunately, this is not a pasture. We can see some scrubby grass in the background, but the majority of the frame is mud, so it's not a pasture. Instead, we would call this area an animal concentration area. Animal concentration areas, or ACAs, can be kind of a scary phrase for some folks because they can conjure up these images of animals being crammed into small lots, but that's not always the case. An animal concentration area is simply an area on a farm where animals spend so much time that vegetation cannot grow. Some other names for these concentration areas that operators might use include dry lots, turnouts, exercise yards, barnyards. They can be paved or they can just be bare ground like here. But because these areas do not have vegetation, it's important to make sure stormwater is flowing around the site and not washing any manure that might be there into surface waters. So this means making sure clean water is diverted around this area when possible. If it's next to a building, make sure the gutters are maintained on that building to limit the amount of clean stormwater that might enter the site. Make sure that there's not concentrated flow coming through this area, and that if water cannot be kept out of the site, that at a minimum, it's flowing through a vegetated area when it leaves. And this is the last section of a manure management plan. They are pretty simple and easy to complete. For the last few slides, we've gone over just a general overview of Chapter 91, Manure Management and its components. But Chapter 91 is not the only regulation that deals with manure in Pennsylvania. The other regulation that we have in PA is called Act 38. Similar to Chapter 91, Act 38 is a water quality program that strives to reduce manure and sediment runoff and pollution from ag operations. Act 38, however, regulates concentrated animal operations, CAOs, and concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, as well as some low-density farms that voluntarily participate in the program. In Allegheny County, one of these volunteer operations is the Allegheny County Parks. So this can get into the weeds kind of quickly, but stay with me, folks. I'm going to describe now how we know when an operation needs this lower level Chapter 91 manure management or a higher level Act 38 nutrient management. Currently in Allegheny County, we have 5 recognized concentrated animal operations, CAOs. To determine if an operation is a CAO, there are 2 steps. First, we determine the animal units. Animal units take into consideration the weight of the animal and how many days they live on a particular site. Second, we determine how many animal units you have per acre of land available for manure. Land available for manure will include pastures or crop fields. A CAO will have 2 or more animal units per acre of land, which ends up being about 2,000 pounds of animals or more per acre. This sounds like it could be a lot, but it adds up really quickly. A typical example in our area are horse operations. Because of their size, anything more than 1 full-size horse per acre becomes a CAO. This calculation has a lot of nuance, and if you're interested in knowing more about the specific calculations required to determine if an operation is a CAO, please let me know, and I am happy to send along some more information after the webinar. If an operation is determined to be a CAO, then they are required to obtain a higher level nutrient management plan. These can only be written by certified commercial nutrient management specialists. They are much more detailed and can be a little expensive to develop. Just to refresh, here we see a horse lounging outside, but can you tell me if this is a pasture or an animal concentration area? Just to recap, We talked about Chapter 91, Manure Management, where we develop manure management plans. We're talking about low density operations. Chapter 91 is regulated by DEP and applicable to all livestock owners, even that one chicken owner. These plans are free to develop, again called manure management plans. And if you have a manure management plan, it does not require any kind of annual inspection from ACCD. Act 38, on the other hand, is a program regulated by the State Conservation Commission, where high density animal operations are required to use a certified commercial nutrient management specialist to write a nutrient management plan. These operations are subject to annual status reviews and inspections. That was a bit of a mouthful, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those now before I move on to the next section.
I think we may be good, Riley.
Okay.
No questions at this time.
Perfect. So often we find out about operations that are out of compliance through complaints. And the number one thing that I hear over and over again when I visit livestock owners is that they were unaware of these regulations, and often they're appreciative to know more about the resources available. Municipalities are in a unique position to communicate with folks in their area and can be key in identifying when an operation could use some additional assistance. There are two major benefits for municipalities in gaining compliance with Chapter 91. The first is just increasing compliance with state laws, but the second is a little closer to home, and that's improving water quality in your municipality. I'm sure some folks are familiar with this picture of a harmful algal bloom in Lake Erie. This photo was taken by the NASA Earth Observatory in 2013, and manure contains two nutrients that can lead to this kind of pollution, and that's nitrogen and phosphorus. Phosphorus in particular depletes the oxygen in the water and leads to these algal blooms, which can lead to fish kills and really damage the environment. So making sure that we are helping to manage the manure runoff on farms is a really important step for improving water quality. There are also some additional benefits. For example, knowing more about Chapter 91 allows you and the municipality to be more informed and respond to manure and livestock related complaints. It's springtime, there's a lot of rain. People are starting to get a little antsy being cooped up. It's disrupting some of our typical manure supply chains. So already we're seeing stacks of manure piling up higher than they normally would, and this can lead to more complaints, which means identifying and resolving manure-related concerns can be kind of a big deal right now. Also, it's important to know these state regulations, especially as different areas are considering increasing livestock permissions for residents. Remember, even if you only have one chicken, you still need one of these plans, and this can help protect the landowner and also the municipality. ACCD has a lot of things that we can do to help support compliance with Chapter 91 for municipalities and landowners. For example, one thing that we do is host manure management plan writing workshops. These can happen just with an individual or in a small group. And if you have an idea for a great location where we can reach multiple landowners to help develop these plans, you saw for yourself, they're pretty simple, and we are happy to organize things like that. Our role is also to educate residents and leadership on Chapter 91. It can be kind of dry, as regulations can be, but we try our best to let people know. The more you know, the more you can do. We also respond to formally submitted complaints, as I've mentioned, and this involves having a complaint come into the district, I'm obligated to make a site visit and determine if compliance is required for the operator. I then communicate to both the livestock owner and the complainant to let them know what's going on, what steps are being taken so we can resolve the issue. But this also leads into where ACCD's true expertise lies, and that's on-site technical assistance. We can help to identify best practices for manure handling, but as well as pull resources for a better pasture establishment or manure composting, or connect to other resources to help design and build better manure storage systems. ACCD has a lot of partners in agriculture, and our position as being the boots on the ground can really help connect homeowners, landowners, livestock owners, municipalities to other folks who are also working in agriculture to find solutions to manure-related problems. This includes NRCS, it includes Pennsylvania Department of Ag, it includes groups that focus on grazing like Southwest Project Grass, or other organizations like PASA and Penn State Extension. So that is the end of my presentation, and I thank you all for listening. As I mentioned, I will be sending out a survey that just asks some questions about how you enjoyed our webinar, and if you have other suggestions for webinars we can do in the future. I'll also send along a couple additional resources if you're interested in learning more. And I ask if you have some ideas for manure management workshops or opportunities in your municipality, feel free to reach out and I am happy to get back to you. If there are any questions, we will take them now.
I don't, oh, there is one question here, Riley. More of a comment, and it's, we allow chickens in our borough through our local zoning ordinance. I guess my question to you would be, are there certain areas of the county that you tend to spend more time in working with folks, places that allow animals or have a lot of animals in their community?
One of the things that I'm trying to do is find areas where there are more concentrations of people who own livestock, especially on a small scale, because sometimes they can fly under the radar. There are areas of the county where I do tend to spend more time, but that's because this program, often I get pulled in the direction of complaints. And so areas that have more livestock or larger livestock on smaller properties, that tends to generate some more complaints. So, but if you have any interest in partnering and seeing how we can bring more manure management to some of the livestock owners in your municipality, I'm happy to work something out. Thank you.
I think that does it for questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone for joining. We will be saving this webinar, and if you feel like you missed something and you want to circle back and take a look later, that will be available. And again, please fill out our survey and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.